The morning started like any other Tuesday for Maya Chen. She was drinking her coffee and checking emails when the doorbell rang. A man in a crisp uniform stood at her door, holding an official envelope that would change everything. "Maya Chen?" he asked, checking his clipboard. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her heart already starting to race. "You've been served," he said simply, handing her the thick envelope before walking away. Maya stood in her doorway, staring at the legal document. Her hands shook slightly as she read the words that made no sense to her. Something about her father's old business. Something about money that went missing 20 years ago. Something about her being responsible now that her father had passed away 6 months earlier. She had thought the hardest part was over. The funeral, the grief, the slow process of healing. Her father had been a good man who worked hard his whole life. He owned a small construction company that helped build half the buildings in their town. Everyone respected him. Everyone loved him. So why was she holding a legal paper that made him sound like a criminal? The law firm's name was printed in bold letters at the top, Vulpine and Associates. Even Maya, who knew nothing about lawyers, had heard whispers about this firm. They were the ones you called when you wanted to destroy someone completely. They were the ones who never lost a case because they fought dirty and didn't care who got hurt. Maya called her best friend Lisa, her voice trembling as she read the legal words she didn't understand. "They're saying Dad stole money?" Maya said, confused. "That doesn't make any sense. Dad was the most honest person I knew." "You need a lawyer," Lisa said immediately. "Don't talk to anyone until you get help." But Maya didn't have money for a big lawyer. She worked as a bookkeeper for a small medical office. Her salary was enough to pay her bills and save a little, but nothing like what these fancy law firms probably charged. And now they were saying she owed hundreds of thousands of dollars that her father supposedly took 20 years ago. 3 days later, Maya found herself walking into the most intimidating building she'd ever seen. The Vulpine and Associates office was on the 20th floor of a glass tower downtown. Everything was black marble and shiny metal. The receptionist barely looked up when Maya gave her name. "Mr. Vulpine will see you now," the woman said, after making Maya wait for 30 minutes. Maya's palms were sweating as she walked down a long hallway lined with certificates and awards. Each frame seemed to tell the story of another person's defeat, another family destroyed by this firm's legal expertise. The office door was solid wood with gold letters spelling out James Vulpine, Senior Partner. Maya knocked softly. "Come in," came a voice from inside. The office was enormous, with windows that looked out over the entire city. Bookshelves filled with thick legal volumes lined the walls. Behind a massive desk sat a man who looked younger than Maya had expected. Maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair and a perfectly pressed suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. She had expected them to be cold, calculating, mean. Instead, they were simply calm, completely, unnaturally calm, like still water in a pond. It was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Ms. Chen," he said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing. "Please, have a seat." Maya sat in the leather chair across from his desk, feeling very small and out of place. She looked around at the awards, the expensive furniture, the view of the city that seemed to stretch forever. "I suppose you're wondering why you're here," Mr. Vulpine said, sitting back down and folding his hands on his desk. "The paper said something about my father's business," Maya said quietly. "But I don't understand. My dad was honest. He never hurt anyone." Mr. Vulpine opened a thick file on his desk. Maya could see her father's name on the tab, along with dates going back 20 years. "Your father's construction company received a large payment in 2004 for a commercial building project," he began, his voice steady and professional. "That payment was made in error. The money belonged to several investors who had been defrauded by the project's main developer. Your father kept the money instead of returning it when the mistake was discovered." "That's not true," Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "My dad would never do that." Mr. Vulpine pulled out a stack of bank records and canceled checks. "These documents show the money going into your father's business account. They also show that he was contacted multiple times about returning the funds. He never responded to those requests." Maya stared at the papers, trying to make sense of the numbers and dates. It all looked official and real, but it couldn't be true. Her father had struggled to keep his business running. He worked 16-hour days and barely made enough to support their family. If he had hundreds of thousands of extra dollars, why? Had they lived so simply? "Even if this were true," Maya said, "why am I responsible? I was 15 years old in 2004. I didn't even know anything about his business." "Because you inherited everything when he died," Mr. Vulpine explained. "His assets, his debts, and his legal obligations. The money he took has grown to over $400,000 with interest and penalties." The number hit Maya like a physical blow. $400,000. She didn't have $400 extra in her bank account most months. "I don't have that kind of money," she whispered. "We're aware of that," Mr. Vulpine said. Those calm eyes studied her face. "Which is why we're prepared to take everything. Your house, your car, your father's property, his tools, everything he left you. It still won't cover the full amount, but it's a start." Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. The house she grew up in, the only home she'd ever known, where every room held memories of her father. His old pickup truck that still smelled like sawdust and coffee. His workshop full of tools he'd collected over 30 years of hard work. "There has to be some mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, you have to understand, my father wasn't a thief." For just a moment, something flickered in Mr. Vulpine's calm eyes. It was so quick Maya almost missed it. Was it sympathy? Doubt? She couldn't tell. "The evidence is very clear, Ms. Chen," he said. "We have bank records, witness statements, correspondence. Your father took money that didn't belong to him, and now that debt falls to you." Maya looked around the office again, at all the symbols of power and success. She thought about her small house, her simple life, her father's memory being destroyed by accusations she couldn't fight. "What happens now?" she asked. "We'll need you to sign some papers acknowledging the debt," Mr. Vulpine said, sliding a document across the desk. "That will make the legal process much simpler for everyone." Maya stared at the paper but didn't touch it. Something in her father's voice from years ago echoed in her mind. "Maya, if something seems too easy, it usually is. Always ask questions. Always think before you sign anything." "I need time to think about this," she said, standing up on shaky legs. Mr. Vulpine nodded, those unsettling, calm eyes following her movement. "Of course, take all the time you need, but understand, Ms. Chen, this situation won't improve with delay. The sooner we resolve this, the easier it will be for everyone involved." As Maya walked toward the door, she felt like she was drowning in deep water, fighting to reach the surface. She turned back for one last look at the man who held her future. In his hands, he was still watching her with those calm, steady eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. 2 weeks after that first meeting, Maya's life became an open book that strangers were reading without permission. Every morning brought new requests for documents, bank statements, tax returns, and personal records going back years. The lawyers wanted to know about every dollar she'd ever earned, every purchase she'd ever made, every decision that had shaped her quiet life. Maya sat at her kitchen table surrounded by boxes of papers that represented 28 years of living. Her father's old business records mixed with her college transcripts, mortgage papers, and even her high school report cards. Everything had to be copied, organized, and handed over to people who would use it all to prove she owed money she didn't have. The phone rang constantly. Investigators calling to ask about her father's friends, his business partners, anyone who might have known about the missing money. Maya answered honestly every time, but their questions made her doubt her own memories. Did your father ever seem to have more money than his business should have produced? They asked. Did you notice any expensive purchases around 2004 or 2005? Did he ever talk about investments or large sums of money? Maya answered no to everything, but she could hear the doubt in their voices. They thought she was lying to protect her father's memory. They thought she was hiding something. The worst part was the depositions. Maya had never heard that word before all this started, but now she dreaded it. It meant sitting in a conference room with multiple lawyers, a court reporter, and a video camera, answering questions for hours while they tried to catch her in contradictions. The first deposition lasted 6 hours. Maya sat across from Mr. Vulpine, and 2 other lawyers, all of them taking notes and asking the same questions in different ways, trying to trip her up. Tell us about your father's work habits in 2004, one lawyer said. He worked every day except Sunday, Maya replied. He left the house at 6 in the morning and usually came home around 8 at night. That's a lot of hours for a small construction company, Mr. Vulpine said, those calm eyes studying her face. Was he working on something particularly large or profitable? He was always busy, Maya said. People trusted him to do good work, so he had steady customers. But nothing unusual? No big projects that might have brought in significant money? Maya tried to remember being 13, 14, 15 years old. Her father had always worked hard, but she'd been focused on school, friends, teenage problems. She hadn't paid attention to his business details. I don't remember anything unusual, she said. The lawyers exchanged glances, as if her honest answer was somehow suspicious. They asked about family vacations they never took, expensive clothes they never bought, restaurant meals they never had. Maya's simple, modest childhood became evidence against her father. If he really had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, why hadn't their lives changed? Maybe he hid the money, one lawyer suggested. Maybe he was planning to use it later. Or maybe he invested it and lost it, another added. Maya wanted to scream that her father wasn't that kind of person, but she'd learned that defending him only made them ask more questions. During the third deposition, Maya finally broke down. They'd been questioning her for 4 hours about bank deposits and expenses from when she was in college. They wanted to know if her father had helped pay for her education, if that money might have come from the disputed funds. He worked extra jobs to help me pay for school, Maya said, her voice getting louder. He painted houses on weekends and did small repair work in the evenings. I have the receipts for everything. He earned every penny honestly. Ms. Chen, please keep your voice down, one of the lawyers said. No, Maya said, tears starting to fall. You're trying to make my father sound like a criminal, and he wasn't. He was the most honest man I ever knew. He taught me to work hard, tell the truth, and help people when you can. That's who he was. The room fell silent except for the sound of Maya crying. She felt exposed and raw, like they'd stripped away all her defenses and left her with nothing but grief and anger. Mr. Vulpine reached across the table and handed her a box of tissues. The simple gesture surprised her. For a moment, his calm mask slipped, and she saw something almost like kindness in his eyes. Let's take a 15-minute break, he said quietly. The other lawyers left the room, but Mr. Vulpine stayed behind, organizing his papers, while Maya tried to pull herself together. This is hard for you, he said, not looking up from his files. You're destroying my father's reputation, Maya replied, wiping her eyes. He spent 30 years building a good name in this community, and you're tearing it down with papers and accusations. Mr. Vulpine was quiet for a long moment. When he finally looked at her, those calm eyes seemed different somehow, less certain. Sometimes, the law requires us to examine things that are painful, he said. That doesn't mean we take pleasure in causing pain. Maya studied his face, looking for some sign that he might actually believe her father was innocent. But his expression was unreadable, professionally neutral. "Do you have children?" Maya asked suddenly. The question seemed to surprise him. "No," he said. "Then you don't understand what it's like to have someone attack the memory of the person who raised you, who taught you everything important about how to live." Mr. Vulpine closed his file folder and leaned back in his chair. "You're right," he said. "I don't understand that." Something in his tone made Maya look at him more carefully. There was a sadness there, hidden beneath the professional calm. She wondered about his life outside this office, whether he had anyone who cared about protecting his memory. When the other lawyers returned, the atmosphere in the room had changed. Somehow, Mr. Vulpine asked fewer aggressive questions and his voice was gentler. Maya still had to answer everything honestly, but she no longer felt like prey being hunted. That evening, Maya sat in her father's old workshop, surrounded by his tools and the smell of sawdust that still lingered in the air. She picked up his favorite hammer, worn smooth by decades of honest work, and wondered how this nightmare had become her reality. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The truth is rarely as simple as it appears. Don't give up looking for it." Maya stared at the message, wondering who could have sent it. The number was blocked, but something about the words reminded her of Mr. Vulpine's voice, calm and measured. She looked around the workshop at her father's life's work and made a decision. She wouldn't just defend his memory. She would find out what really happened 20 years ago. Maya couldn't sleep that night. The mysterious text message kept running through her mind. Someone was trying to tell her something, but what? And why wouldn't they say it directly? The next morning, instead of going to work, Maya called in sick and drove to the public library. If there were answers about what happened 20 years ago, maybe she could find them in old newspaper records and business filings. She wasn't a lawyer, but she knew how to research and ask questions. The librarian helped her find the newspaper archives from 2004 and 2005. Maya spent hours scrolling through old articles, looking for anything about construction projects, missing money, or business scandals. Most of it was boring local news, but then she found something interesting. A small article from March 2005 talked about a large commercial development that had fallen apart when the main developer disappeared with investor money. The project was supposed to be a shopping center on the east side of town. Several local contractors had been left unpaid when the whole thing collapsed. Maya's heart started racing when she read the name of the development company, East Side Commercial Partners. That was the same name mentioned in the legal papers about her father. She printed the article and kept searching. Over the next few hours, she found more pieces of the puzzle. The developer, a man named Richard Hoffman, had taken money from investors and then vanished before the project was finished. Several contractors had filed lawsuits, but Hoffman was never found. But here's what was strange. According to the newspaper reports, her father's construction company was listed as one of the victims, not one of the criminals. The articles said, Chen Construction was owed over $50,000 for foundation work that was never paid. Maya sat back in her chair, confused. If her father was a victim of the scam, why were the lawyers now saying he was the one who stole money? Something didn't add up. She spent the rest of the day at the courthouse, looking through old legal filings. The clerk helped her find the original lawsuit her father had filed against East Side Commercial Partners. The documents showed that Chen Construction had done the work they were contracted to do, but Hoffman's company had disappeared without paying. As Maya read through the legal papers, she realized something important. James Vulpine's name was on some of the oldest documents, but he wasn't representing the investors back then. He was working for Richard Hoffman, the man who had stolen everyone's money. Maya's hands shook as she photocopied the documents. James Vulpine had been Hoffman's lawyer 20 years ago. He had helped set up the fake development company. And now, somehow, he was representing the people who claimed her father had stolen from them. That evening, Maya sat in her living room, surrounded by copies of old newspapers and legal documents, trying to understand what she had discovered. Her phone rang, and she was surprised to see it was James Vulpine's office number. "Miss Chen, this is James Vulpine. I was wondering if you might have time to meet tomorrow evening. There are some things we need to discuss privately." "What kind of things?" Maya asked, her voice cautious. "Things that are better discussed in person. Would 7 o'clock work?" "My office will be empty then, and we won't be interrupted." Maya thought about the documents spread across her coffee table. "Yes," she said. "I have some things to discuss with you, too." The next evening, Maya walked into the same intimidating office building, but this time she felt different. She wasn't just a scared woman trying to defend her father's memory anymore. She was someone who had found pieces of the truth, and she wanted answers. James Vulpine's office looked different in the evening light. The harsh fluorescent lights were off, replaced by softer desk lamps that made the space feel less threatening. He stood up when she entered, and she noticed he looked tired, older than he had during their first meeting. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Can I get you some coffee or water?" "I'm fine," Maya said, settling into the chair with her folder of documents. "But I have questions for you." James sat down and folded his hands on his desk, those calm eyes studying her face. "I imagine you do. You've been doing research." "How did you know that?" "Because you're your father's daughter," he said quietly. "And your father never accepted easy answers either." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? Did you know my father?" James was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Your father was my mentor when I was a young lawyer just starting out. He taught me that the law should be about justice, not just winning cases. He was the most ethical person I ever knew." Maya stared at him in shock. "You knew my dad? But then why are you trying to destroy his reputation?" James opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed him as a much younger man, standing next to Maya's father at what looked like a construction site. Both men were smiling, and James looked proud and happy in a way that was completely different from the calm, controlled person she knew now. "This was taken in 2003, James said, handing her the photo. "I had just passed the bar exam, and I was working for a small firm. Your father hired us to handle some contracts for his business. He became like a father to me." "But the lawsuit says you were working for Richard Hoffman," Maya said, pulling out her documents. James nodded slowly. "Hoffman approached me in early 2004. He offered me a job with his company, much more money than I was making. Your father advised me not to take it. He said Hoffman seemed dishonest, that something didn't feel right about his business deals." "But you took the job anyway?" "I was young and stupid and wanted to get rich quickly," James said, his voice heavy with regret. "Your father was disappointed in me, but he didn't say I told you so. He just said he hoped I would remember what he taught me about doing the right thing." Maya looked at the photograph again, seeing her father's kind smile and this younger version of James Vulpine, before life had made him hard and careful. "What happened with Hoffman?" she asked. "Everything your father predicted. Hoffman was running a scam from the beginning. He took money from investors and used it to pay for fake progress reports and phony construction work. When I realized what was happening, I tried to get out, but it was too late. Hoffman disappeared with millions of dollars, and everyone who had worked with him became suspects. Including you? Especially me. I lost my license for 2 years. I lost my reputation. I lost everything." James looked directly at her with those calm eyes that now seemed full of old pain. "Including your father's respect." Maya felt her anger starting to fade, replaced by confusion and something that might have been sympathy. "So, why are you coming?" after me now? Why are you blaming my dad for what Hoffman did? James stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. Because 20 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. And now I'm trying to decide if I'm going to make another one. Maya stared at James's back as he stood by the window, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. The office felt different now, heavy with secrets that had been buried for 20 years. What terrible mistake? Maya asked, her voice barely above, a whisper. James turned around slowly, and for the first time since she'd met him, his calm mask was completely gone. He looked vulnerable, almost broken. After Hoffman disappeared and everything fell apart, I spent 2 years fighting to get my law license back. I was broke, living in a tiny apartment, working odd jobs just to survive. The legal community treated me like I was poison. No one would hire me. Maya watched his face, seeing pain she recognized. It was the same look she'd had after her father died when the world suddenly felt unsafe and unfair. Then one day, a group of investors approached me. They were the people who had lost money in Hoffman's scam. They said they had new evidence about where the missing money went. They offered me a partnership in their law firm if I could help them recover their losses. And you believed them? James sat back down at his desk, looking older than his years. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. They showed me bank records, transfer documents, all kinds of official-looking papers that seemed to prove various contractors had kept money they shouldn't have. Including my father? Your father's name was on their list, yes. They said he had received a large payment that was meant for other creditors. They had documents showing the money going into his account. Maya pulled out the newspaper clippings she'd found. But these articles say my dad was one of the victims. They say Hoffman owed him money, not the other way around. James nodded slowly. I know. I've been having doubts about this case for months. Some of the evidence doesn't add up. Some of the documents look questionable. You think they're fake? I think someone is lying to me. The question is whether it's my clients or whether it's... He paused, looking uncomfortable. Whether it's what? Whether it's you. Whether you really don't know anything about money your father might have hidden. Maya felt anger flare up in her chest. I've been completely honest with you. I've given you every document you asked for. I've answered every question, even when they made me cry. What more do you want? I want to believe you, James said quietly. But believing you means accepting that I've spent the last 6 months destroying an innocent woman's life. It means accepting that I've been manipulated again, just like I was 20 years ago. Maya saw the real problem now. James wasn't just fighting her. He was fighting his own past, his own guilt, his own fear of being fooled again. Show me the evidence, Maya said suddenly. What? Show me these bank records and documents that supposedly prove my father stole money. If they're real, I'll see. Something that makes sense. If they're fake, maybe I can spot what's wrong. James hesitated. I'm not supposed to share evidence with the opposing party. I'm not the opposing party, Maya said firmly. I'm your mentor's daughter, and you owe him the truth. You said he taught you about justice. Well, this is your chance to honor what he taught you. James stared at her for a long moment, those calm eyes searching her face. Then he opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. These are copies of the bank records my clients provided, he said, spreading papers across his desk. They show a payment of $200,000 going into your father's business account on March 15th, 2004. Maya studied the bank statement. The numbers looked real, the format looked official, but something bothered her about it. This says the deposit was made on a Monday, she said. So? March 15th, 2004 was a Monday, but look at this. Maya pulled out her phone and searched for an old calendar. My father had surgery that week, gallbladder surgery. He was in the hospital from Sunday through Wednesday. James frowned. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. Bank deposits can be processed without the account holder being present. But look at the signature on the deposit slip, Maya said, pointing to the bottom of the document. That's not my father's handwriting. James looked more closely at the signature. Maya pulled out one of her father's old business contracts from her folder and placed it next to the bank document. See the difference? My dad always wrote his R's with a little loop at the top. This signature doesn't have that loop, and the way the N's are formed is completely different. James compared the two signatures, and Maya watched his expression change as he realized what she was showing him. You're right, he said quietly. These signatures are completely different. Someone forged his name, Maya said. Someone else deposited that money in his account. James stood up and walked to his filing cabinet, pulling out more documents. If that's true, then other evidence might be fake too. These transfer records, these correspondence files. For the next 2 hours, Maya and James went through every piece of evidence together. Maya's knowledge of her father's business practices, his handwriting, his banking habits, revealed problems with document after document. This invoice is dated wrong, Maya said, pointing to a bill supposedly from her father's company. Dad always used the actual date of completion, never the start date, and he never charged for materials separately like this shows. And this. Bank statement shows deposits on days when your father's business account was actually frozen due to the Hoffman investigation, James added, checking dates against old court records. As the evidence pile grew, so did the realization that James had been deliberately misled by his own clients. They played me, James said, sitting back in his chair with a look of stunned disbelief. They used my desperation to rebuild my career, my guilt over what happened with Hoffman, and they fed me fake evidence to go after innocent people. But why my father specifically? Maya asked. James was quiet for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out another old document. Because your father filed a complaint with the State Bar Association about my conduct during the Hoffman case. He was trying to protect other people from being hurt by what I had done. His complaint was one of the reasons I lost my license. Maya felt a chill. So this whole thing is revenge? Against both of us? Against your father for reporting me, and against me for failing them the first time. James's voice was bitter. They wanted your father's reputation destroyed, and they wanted me to be the one to do it. Perfect revenge. Maya looked around the office at all the awards and certificates, understanding now that James's success had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. What happens now? She asked. James was quiet for a long time, staring at the fake documents spread across his desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and calm again, but this time the calm felt different, determined instead of distant. Now, I have to decide if I'm going to be the man your father tried to teach me to be, or if I'm going to keep being the man I became after he gave up on me. Maya watched his face, seeing something she hadn't seen before. Hope, maybe, or courage. What would the man my father tried to teach you do? She asked. James smiled for the first time since she'd known him, and it transformed his entire face. He would make this right. 3 days later, Maya sat in the same courthouse where this nightmare had begun, but everything felt different now. Instead of sitting alone at the defendant's table, she sat next to James Vulpine. Instead of facing him as an enemy, he was now her advocate. The courtroom was packed with people Maya didn't recognize. James had explained that word had gotten out about what they'd discovered. Other contractors, other families who had been targeted by the same group of fake investors were here to see justice finally served. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair, looked over the documents James had submitted the day before. Mr. Vulpine, the judge said, these are serious allegations you're making against your own clients. James stood up, and Maya could see his hands shaking slightly. Yes, Your Honor. After reviewing the evidence more carefully, I've discovered that multiple documents presented in this case appear to be fraudulent. I believe my clients have been deliberately misleading both myself and this court. Maya watched as the lead prosecutor, a man named Attorney Wilson, who represented the supposed victims, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been confident and aggressive during the earlier hearings, but now he looked nervous. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Vulpine," Judge Morrison continued. "Are you prepared to present evidence of this fraud?" "I am, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to call a handwriting expert who has analyzed the documents in question." For the next hour, Maya listened as expert after expert testified about the fake signatures, the altered bank records, and the forged business documents that had been used to frame her father. Each piece of testimony felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. But the most powerful moment came when James himself took the witness stand. "Mr. Vulpine," his replacement lawyer asked, "can you explain to the court how you came to discover these inconsistencies?" James looked directly at Maya before answering. "Ms. Chen's knowledge of her father's business practices revealed problems with the evidence that I should have caught earlier. Her father was a man of precise habits and careful record-keeping. When she pointed out discrepancies in signatures and dates, I realized I had failed in my duty to thoroughly investigate the evidence I was presenting. Why didn't you catch these problems initially?" James was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him struggling with his answer. "Because I wanted to believe the evidence was real. 20 years ago, I made serious mistakes that cost me my career and my reputation. When these clients offered me a chance to rebuild, I was too eager to prove myself. I didn't ask enough questions." "And what did you discover when you did start asking questions?" "I discovered that my clients had deliberately targeted both Ms. Chen and myself. They wanted to destroy her father's reputation because he had reported my professional misconduct years ago, and they wanted to use me to do it because they knew I was desperate to rebuild my career." Maya felt tears in her eyes as she listened to James publicly admit his mistakes and defend her father's memory. This couldn't have been easy for him. Admitting professional misconduct could cost him his license again. After James finished testifying, Judge Morrison called for a brief recess. Maya followed James out into the hallway, where they found a quiet corner away from the reporters and other observers. "Thank you," Maya said simply. "Don't thank me yet," James replied. "This case might be over, but I'll probably face discipline from the state bar for not catching the fraud earlier. I might lose my license again. But you're doing the right thing. Now, that has to count for something." James smiled sadly. "Your father would have caught the fake evidence on day one. He had an eye for dishonesty that I never developed." "Maybe," Maya said, "but he also believed people could change. He believed people could learn from their mistakes and become better." "How do you know that?" Maya reached into her purse and pulled out an old letter, yellowed with age. "I found this in his papers after he died. It's a letter he wrote to the State Bar Association but never sent." James read the letter, his expression changing as he took in the words. Maya had memorized parts of it already. "While I believe Mr. Vulpine showed poor judgment in his association with Richard Hoffman, I do not believe he acted with criminal intent. He was a young lawyer who made mistakes, but I have seen his character, and I believe he has the potential to become an excellent attorney if he learns from this experience. I hope the board will consider rehabilitation rather than permanent punishment." James looked up at Maya, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "He wrote this?" "He wrote it the day before his first heart attack, 3 years after you lost your license. I think he was going to send it to help you get your license back, but then he got sick and—" Maya's voice trailed off. "He was trying to help me even after everything I'd done. Because he saw something good in you. And I think he was right." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Morrison delivered her ruling. All charges against Maya were dropped. The evidence of fraud was so clear that criminal charges would be filed against the people who had created the fake documents. And most importantly to Maya, her father's name was officially cleared. But the real victory came 3 months later, when Maya got a phone call from James. "I wanted you to know," he said. "The state bar decided not to revoke my license. They're putting me on probation and requiring me to take ethics courses, but they said my cooperation in exposing the fraud counted in my favor." "That's wonderful," Maya said, and she meant it. "I'm leaving Vulpine and Associates," James continued. "I'm starting my own practice, small cases, helping people who can't afford big law firms. I was wondering, would you consider being my first client?" Maya was confused. "But I don't need a lawyer anymore." "Actually, you do. The people who defrauded you owe you compensation for what they put you through, and there are other families they targeted who could use help getting justice." Maya thought about it for a moment. "What would my father think about me working with you?" "I think," James said slowly, "he would be proud of both of us." 6 months. Later, Maya stood in the small office that James had rented downtown. It wasn't fancy like his old office. There was no marble, no expensive view, no wall of intimidating certificates, just a simple space with comfortable chairs and windows that let in natural light. "Chen versus East Side Recovery Partners," James said, holding up a thick file. "We won. Full compensation plus damages." Maya smiled, looking at the check that would pay off her house and give her enough money to start the scholarship fund she'd been planning in her father's name. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." James leaned back in his chair, and Maya noticed that his eyes weren't cold and calculating anymore. They were warm, thoughtful, at peace. "Your father taught me that the law should be about justice, not just winning," he said. "It took me 20 years to understand what he meant." Maya looked around the simple office, thinking about second chances and the long road to redemption. Her father had always said that the best victories were the ones where everybody won something important. Looking at James now, she thought her father would be proud of them both.